Barry Sullivan recalls the last years of steam. The working partnership between the LMS and Southern was continued after nationalisation. As we pass on to the double track through the Stour Valley, Bill Harford recalls nocturnal milk workings.
Tumblecoombe Upper, they put it on the back so that when you got the engine on and they pulled you down to the lower, they'd be on the engine then. For when you got to Bailey Gate, you'd have done hook the 2 or 3 milk tanks and then shunt them down and put them in the milk factory for them at night. We used to do that quite regular, especially on a Saturday.
Seasonal freight passed through.
Certain times of the year you used to get cider apples come in at Hamworthy, and they were heavy trains. I don't know where it came from, whether they come from France, and they used to go to Hereford and places like that for cider making. They used to load them in open wagons. When you used to have the train of them, they were heavy.
Branksome men were versatile.
Well, we used to work the passenger up, and when we got to Bailey Gate, the freight would come down, swap over there, and we used to, they used to have a load of stuff for Bailey Gate to go in the ordinary sidings for unloading, or it would be in the milk factory. But we always used to have the shunt the milk factory, but they never used to put the tanks on that train. They used to come down in the afternoon on a special train. But we used to have to go up in there, and if there were empty ones, we'd bring them out, and because they could only unload so many at a time, so you used to have to shunt the tanks itself. In the early days, they reckoned that you could go in there and they'd give you a drink of milk and everything. And they started doing a lot of the whey in these barrels as well, and they used to put them in wagons and take them away. But they used to have a huge field there, and they used to put the whey in the barrels and sort of store them in the field right next to the factory. I suppose that's what's left over after they made the cheese, because they used to make a lot of cheese in there. You could see them making the cheese, but they never used to give you none.
Standard classes worked alongside the 4Fs.
The Armstrongs, which was the 060s, they had a smaller wheel and they were ideal for the freight. Shunting boys in the yard and pulling the freight trains, heavy freight trains over the Mendips. That's what they were built for. Some of them were built specifically for the S&D. They were good steaming engine, and they were powerful engines. And in the summertime, when you got them on a passenger service, you could still time the train with them. They used to rattle and bang, but at least you knew they was going to get there, keep going.
The S&D followed the Stour Gap past Charlton Marshall. Built for high route availability, the smaller standard classes had attractive efforts similar to the 4Fs. Their advantage lay in easier maintenance, outside cylinders and valve gear. Leading wheels also reduced tire wear. Local traffic was falling out of favour.
A firm called Blandford and Webbs used to have a big shed there, and you used to have to shunt the shed with animal feed, fertilizers. They used to do all agricultural stuff. And at certain times of the year, you'd have a whole train, 30, 40 wagons of fertilizer come in bags, all bagged up in these box wagons. One of the shunters at plant for Ginger, he knew the owner and all that of Blandford and Webbs, and they had a letter from the old British Rail saying that they could still have their fertilizer, but they would have to go to Poole to collect them. The trouble was that, like this chap said, if he was going to do that, he just as well buy lorries and go to Avonmouth and collect it.
Single line working resumed. The S&D was known for characters.
It's Muggins Brewer. He was a case. He was good to me. I mean, I used to go fishing with him. He used to have a few tales to tell, you know. When he said there was this rabbit sitting on the bank, he said, and a pike. He said, "You see these big pike jump out the river and grab this rabbit and took it back in." He said, "But it's all right." He said, "Because I caught him." He said, "And we had rabbit and pike pie." Oh, yeah, I mean, rubbish. And he said, "Some of these people used to swallow it." And I used to think, "Oh, he must have gone to a different river than me, Bertie boy."
Branksome men had strong preferences.
Well, you know much about the old Black Fives. I mean, to me, they were the best engines that I ever worked on. Go anywhere, do anything. You know, the old sayings that if they wanted an engine to go anywhere, just pick a Black Five and it'd go there. The standard Fives, they weren't on a par with a Stanier Black, but they weren't far off, I would say. With the Fives, you could fire them similar to you did the Staniers. You know, you could have a nice big fire in them, but the other ones you wanted light fire. The 76s I suppose, were a better one than the 75s, but even them it seemed a bit too small for. I think they would have been better off they built a few more 73s and done away with them.
Boundary changes added variety to the familiar cavalcade of locomotives and stock.
On a Saturday when they utilised even a 7 freight engine for the passenger trains, and then you had a rock and roll. Of course, they came into their own when they got into the Mendips, because they flew up over there with 8 or 9 coaches on as though they didn't have anything behind them. That's where their beauty was.
Like the southern main line beyond Salisbury, the Somerset and Dorset was transferred to the western region from Shillingstone, where a loop provided a passing place on the single line. fireman's job was not all hard labour.
You were learning the road, you were helping the driver, you were keeping an eye out all the time, so you could have a look around. People shouldn't get the idea that you picked the shovel up at Bournemouth and put it down at Bath, because you didn't. You knew that, that your fire was made up ready when you left Bournemouth, and you would fire accordingly. If you did, you want about 3 tenderfuls of coal, wouldn't you? It was your job to keep the boiler full up so that the driver didn't have to worry about anything. And if you had a good fireman, that's all you had to concentrate on as a driver, just driving the train and keeping an eye out for the signals, because you knew that your fireman would be doing the same for you at certain places.
The next crossing point was Sturminster Newton.
And you got to know the road so well that the fireman would know where he had to look out. And you used to have to remember that as soon as you went by the distance signal, you had to be ready to put the tablet out. You had to keep all these things in your mind. But
Single line working had its hazards.
you had the automatic catcher, change his tablet, put that out. I mean, health and safety would never allow it today. You used to have to hang out the side with a tablet in one hand, hold on to the other hand, and you were still rattling along about 75 mile an hour, and put the tablet in and then wait for it to change over, hoping that you were going to catch it. Because if you didn't, you were about a mile down the track and had to walk back, you know, to meet the signalman coming the other way with the tablet in his hand if he found it. Because sometimes when you hit it, it would go anywhere, you know, and if he wasn't watching it, it'd take him 5 or 10 minutes to look for it. I do believe there's a story that once at Banks, they never found it, and it was found about 3 weeks later in a wagon somewhere, you know, way up north.
Somerset and Dorset tradition went deeper than a coat of paint, as Keith Sloper recalls.
We were a book connection with an up Exeter Waterloo train, and we would run in about 2 minutes later, and would come the Exeter train, and all the passengers that we'd picked up from Blandford upwards, they would be able to catch a train to London or Salisbury or wherever they were going. Anyway, all of a sudden they brought the warships in on the West of England line, you know, and they retimed it to be a couple of minutes earlier. So then that meant we wouldn't be a book connection. So what the local railwayman, the Somerset and Dorset railwayman would do, we would go a bit faster and get to Templecombe Junction. The signalman would be a bit quick. You have the banker on you, and you whip into the station, and you just make the connection. So that went on for a little while. And all of a sudden, the powers that be at Swindon suddenly realised what was going on. They were still getting through passengers from Blandford and, you know, Sturminster Newton and what have you. But they suddenly